With the North Novas is Lieutenant Harry Nutter.
I looked up the dike and down the dike, with my men spread out behind me. Went 50 yards and did not hear a sound or see a movement. Then rounded a bend and came upon a dead German. This shook me a bit, and I went around another bend and saw a young German crouched down behind the dike. He was much more petrified than I. Then he jumped up, threw his rifle away, and came running towards me, with his hands up.
This is Retranchement Village, and it was captured by the Canadians at the end of October 1944. By this time, they had reduced the Breskin pockets to a very small number of positions, and of course these positions were very heavily fortified. And the only way the Canadians were going to capture them was with armor. To get the armor to the front, you had to build the bridges over the canals, and the Canadian engineers had that job. The bridge here at Retranchement was built by a company of Canadian engineers under Sergeant John Hickman. And of course the Germans know that the bridge is going to mean armor, and they're shelling them continuously or mortaring them. But under heavy fire, the Canadian engineers did their job, and the armor could cross and get into the attack. This is a memorial that was erected by the local Dutch community to commemorate the bravery of the Canadian engineers who erected the Hickman Bridge in 1944. You can actually see a piece of the original Bailey Bridge over here, and of course the plaque explains the story how under fire the Canadian engineers fearlessly put up the bridge and helped liberate Holland. The sad part about it is Sergeant J.L. Hickman was mortally wounded in the action and died later on the day of October 31st, 1944.
November 1944. The fighting on the Scheldt ends. The port of Antwerp is open. Vital supplies flood in so that the Allied armies can make their final push into Germany. But in the muddy dikes and polders of the Scheldt, hundreds of Canadians have died.
This is Adigem Canadian War Cemetery in Belgium. It contains the graves of more than 800 Canadian soldiers. The Battle of the Scheldt cost Canada 6,000 casualties, and those killed in the Breskin's pocket are buried here. As with all the war cemeteries, it's the graves that tell the story. The fiercest fighting in the Breskin's pocket took place in the early days along the Leopold Canal, and there are more than 100 graves of the men killed in that fighting in this cemetery. This is the grave of A.J. Babineau of the Canadian Scottish, and of course they're one of the first regiments to cross the canal. And with them went the Regina Rifles. This is the grave of Rifleman Mosser, killed on the 6th of October, the first day of battle. And the last regiment to enter the battle, and actually they suffered amongst the highest casualties, were the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, and this is the grave of Corporal Myers, killed 9th October 1944, age 30. This is the grave of Sergeant John Hickman of the Royal Canadian Engineers, and he had died October 31st, 1944. The Scheldt had been a costly but tremendous victory for the Canadians. But there was to be one more big battle before the war was over, this time in Germany, at the Rhineland.
The Rhineland, February 1945. Driven back into their homeland, German troops now prepare a desperate, last-ditch defense of German soil in front of the River Rhine. To strike deep into the heart of Germany, and finally defeat the Nazis, the Allies must reach and cross the Rhine. But parts of the Rhine are flooded, and the easiest crossings now lie to the south. The Canadian plan is to attack through Reichwald Forest, over Udom Ridge, through the Hochwald Forest, to the town of Xanten on the Rhine. February 8th, 1945, Allied guns open fire. The Battle of the Rhineland begins. And in a few days of muddy, bloody fighting, against a desperate German resistance, the Allies force their way past the Reichwald Forest and reach Udom Ridge.
This was the front line of the 1st Canadian Army in mid-February 1945. By February 13th, they had cleared the Reichwald, and there was severe fighting going on in Moylan Wood, off to my left, about 3 miles away. By February 18th to the 19th, the Canadians were anticipating a move on the ridge that's just in front of me over here. You can see it marked by all the big windmills. The idea was that they would load up 2 infantry battalions, the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, the Rileys, and the Essex Scottish into their Kangaroos, which are really sawed-off tanks. What they didn't know was there was 2 divisions available for counterattack, and for the next 24 hours, those men survived on pure blood and guts.
Resisting the German assault with the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry near Udom Ridge is Lieutenant John Williamson.
We were counterattacked several times. The Germans were right on top of us, and on a couple of occasions, right in the same building with us. They ran in, threw a couple of grenades, and ran out again. Later that night, the Germans blew a hole through the end of the pig pen and started coming through it. I had a Tommy gun and I let go of the whole 30 rounds and killed the first German officer that came through the hole. The others, I guess, dispersed under fire from our platoon.
These are the shell fragments in the field. There's quite a bit of this stuff for a World War II battlefield. And of course, it shows how much the play the artillery had in the battle. Both the German and the Canadian artillery just pounded these areas back and forth. About 4 o'clock in the morning, in this sector here, the Queen's Own Rifles from Toronto attacked. And of course, each one of these farms were defended by German paratroops, and each one was basically a fortress.
With the Queen's Own Rifles attacking Mossow Farm near Udom Ridge is Rifleman Don Chittenden.
A heavy enemy artillery barrage opened up while I was out in the open. The barrage killed many of my buddies. Cousins dashed up beside me and said, "Chittenden, you're gonna get your ass shot off." Then Cousins raced across open ground and climbed up onto one of our tanks, and amid the hail of fire, pointed to where the enemy machine gun was.
Aubrey Cousins came out in this field and he found a Sherman of the 1st Hussars, and he sat on the turret and basically directed it into the farm. So the tank ran right into one of the buildings, then Cousins got out and single-handedly took care of the Germans in 2 other buildings.
We found several Jerrys were holed up in the cellar of one of the houses. As we'd taken a severe mauling, Wagner and I wanted to use grenades. Cousins was trying to talk us out of it. He moved into plain sight and started shouting to the Jerrys to come out and give themselves up. By thus exposing himself, he was trying to gain their confidence. It worked. We got 14 Jerrys out of that house. We had to dispose of these prisoners, so Cousins told a few of us to take them behind the lines. That was the last time I saw Cousins alive.
On his way back to report what he has done, Aubrey Cousins is shot by a German sniper. For his action at Mossow Farm, Aubrey Cousins is awarded a Victoria Cross. In the next few days, the Canadians fight their way through villages and farms, up to the Hochwald Forest.
This is the northern end of the Hochwald, and you can see along here a German trench from the Second World War. The Germans had fortified the wood. They had dug deep trenches and put up logs for protection. On March 1st, 1945, the Canadians made their first attempt at the forest in this area. Across these fields, the Essex Scottish attacked, as well as other Canadian infantry units, but the Essex Scottish were under the command of Major Fred Tilston.
Leading his men on a dash forward under enemy fire, Major Fred Tilston single-handedly clears out an enemy trench and machine gun post. And while his unit fights off repeated counterattacks, Tilston, though already wounded several times, sets off on the sixth journey to get ammunition.
We were short of ammunition, and now we found out we would get no more. I headed over to D Company to bring back some more ammunition. Between our position and that of D Company, there was a huge bomb crater, and as I went through it, a shell or a mortar bomb exploded within 6 feet of me. I knew I was through right then and there. I just made myself as comfortable as I could. I undid my webbing, gave myself a shot of morphine, and I think I became unconscious intermittently, because not too long afterwards, when stretcher bearers were around me, I heard them yelling, "Hey, there's another one over here."
For his action in the Hochwald Forest, Fred Tilston is awarded the Victoria Cross. But he has had one leg blown off, and the other so badly mangled that he will lose it too. After 3 weeks of unceasing fighting in the Rhineland, the Canadians arrive at the gates of Xanten, on the banks of the Rhine.
These are the old gates entering into the city of Xanten. Some of the most famous photographs of the war were taken by Ken Bell, and they were taken of this street in Xanten as the Canadian troops entered in victory.
Adolf, you've bitten off much more than you can chew. Come on, hold your hand out. We're all fed up with you. Go blimey.
On March 9th, 1945, Canadian troops advanced through Xanten right to the banks of the Rhine. We were finally on target, but it had been a costly battle. In a little over a month, 6,000 Canadians were killed or wounded or prisoners, but we had delivered the goods. The next job for the Canadians was to advance north through Germany and to liberate Holland.